if you know nothing about the world of art, you still know the name Picasso. I think that he's actually the most searched person on Google after Jesus and maybe, I don't know, before Napoleon. So the one thing about Picasso and the reason why he's so revolutionary is that Picasso really changed everything about art. And Picasso continuously throughout his career keeps on renewing his own artwork and the art world at the same time. So he will take a painting by artists such as Delacroix or Velázquez, like Les Menines that you will see in Barcelona at the museum, and he recreates it in his own language. He translates it in a more modern language. He always says, you don't actually invent anything, you just go back and recreate in your own way. And this is what is so important about Picasso, is that there are no limits to what he will try, what he will test. He's someone that really reinvents all the time, continuously, including himself. He is a painter who paints from the guts. Maybe Matisse paints from the mind, and Chagall paints from the heart. Picasso paints from the guts. He really is the painter of truth. He will show you everything from war to love, to sex, to politics, and he is really the artist who has no boundaries. He really is revolutionary in so many different ways, not only in the art world, but that is why everyone has heard of Picasso. He really was a beacon for many, many artists that came after that. Even Warhol, even anyone that you see today has its basis in Picasso. He really changed the way art was perceived and created. So there are a lot of rumors about Picasso and fallacies. The one thing that people don't really realize when it comes to Picasso is they've heard all the horror stories of someone who is somewhat sociopathic, and the fact that he was so difficult with his women, and that is absolutely correct, that is true. The one thing that people don't realize is that he was actually incredibly nice to the people that worked around him, especially the employees of my grandfather's studio. He loved the idea of working with blue-collar people. He himself related a lot more to them than he did to a lot of his clients or the people that bought his work. They didn't care so much who he was. He would come to the studio, they would do their work trying to help him, and then they would go home in the evening. They never asked him for anything, they never begged, they never really cared who he was as a famous person. And God knows he was famous. I mean, he was already back then in the late 40s and the 50s and the 60s, he was an incredibly famous man who was written about everywhere in every magazine, in every newspaper. And yet our employees, and there were about 180 of them, really never bothered him. And he loved talking to them. He loved bringing them a few bottles of wine as if he was one of the guys. And they loved chatting with him, they loved his accent. You know, he had this great Spanish, wonderful charisma, this amazing, sexy accent, and they knew how successful he was with the ladies. But they really enjoyed working with him. They may not have loved his work because they may not have been able to relate, and they may not have necessarily had the education at the time, but they really enjoyed working with him. He was happiest, and his former partner, Françoise Gillot, who is the mother of Paloma and Claude Picasso, will tell you, he was happiest when he was in the studio working, because he was working in collaboration with master printers. There's a very famous story of one of the master printers that was trying to work on something that was almost impossible to print because Picasso had used wax, he had used all sorts of gasoline, all use of materials that you're not supposed to use in lithography. And of course, Picasso looked at him and said, "Oh, and I thought you were the best printer in Paris. Maybe I was wrong," and threw the gauntlet and threw a challenge to the master printer. For which, of course, the master printer grabbed everything and said, "Well, you stay here for an hour." And then he went, worked on the press, and managed to pull a couple proofs from what Picasso had given him. So he knew exactly what to do. But the workers, the blue-collar man that worked at the studio really respected him, and they had a really good, easy relationship with him. It was very different when you worked with Picasso than if you were married to Picasso. If you were a woman, you were in trouble. There are a lot of stories about Picasso, and I would say that maybe 75% of them are true. But they're pushing it. You know, they said that he would write checks and people wouldn't cash them. I don't know. If somebody writes me a check, trust me, I will cash it. It doesn't matter who it is. And Picasso certainly cared about cash and cared about money enough that he would cash every check. I think that one of the stories that my grandfather told me where he was there actually is that he sold the same painting twice because the first person gave him a check, and an hour later another collector came in and wanted to buy the same piece but had cash, and so he sold it actually twice and repainted another painting, selling it to the first customer saying, "It's a much better painting, I wasn't satisfied with it." No, Picasso was no fool. He preferred to actually pay his way. He would pay most of his bills. He would pay in the restaurant. And he didn't draw, that's correct. Yeah, he didn't want to give it away. And I think that most serious artists understand that what they do is intrinsically valuable. That if they're creating something, there's a certain value in it. What Picasso did is actually, he was quite generous, and he would draw little doodles or he would draw portraits as a gift for people. But very, very rarely would he try to use it to, he liked cash, yes, he liked cash, but he also paid his bills. So again, there's a lot of there are a lot of stories going around, and I think you shouldn't believe everything that is said. If you really want a true account of the way Picasso was, for example, with women, you can read My Life with Picasso by François Gillot, which is a really accurate account, and the only truly accurate account, because you have to have lived 10 years with someone to know. But it's actually, if you read it, it's actually quite interesting because it's much more humane than you would imagine. And Picasso was quite human in many ways. While he was a genius, he was someone that you could actually understand and relate to. He really changed the world, not just the art world. This is another really strong example of an artist changing the world. So this is very interesting because Picasso really has so many different periods. Most artists just have one way of doing works, and I think that if you even go through Warhol, you may have two or so. So it's quite basic. But when you look at Picasso, you're talking about, you could say 9 or even 10 different periods. That's because Picasso renewed himself and his work on a constant basis. So you have the pink period, the blue period, you have Cubism, you have neoclassical period where he goes back into antiquities, works that are influenced by even prehistoric, but also mostly African art, which was very prevalent in France in the 1920s and 30s as we were discovering our colonies a little furthermore. all these different influences, Picasso revisits and looks at humanity from different points of view, not only just culturally, but also metaphysically. When you're looking at Cubism, you're looking at the same object from three different, on a 3D level, but putting it back on a 2D perspective. All this was really groundbreaking and revolutionary. Before that, artists had been kind of photographers painting an image or something that was a current event and putting it on canvas. He looks at an apple in so many different ways, you don't even realize that it's an apple anymore, but you do. It's just really making the viewer do their work as viewers. Again, a work of art requires the artist, but it also requires a viewer to analyze and take out what they want out of it. Once the work is out there, it is a job, it is the work of the viewer to participate and pull out what they want out of it. And then the artist sort of lets go. And that's why I always say, no one can tell you what you're supposed to like. You have to decide what you like. And no one can tell you whether it's good or bad. It's up to you at the end of the day. And you should never feel bad that the work that you like is not something that maybe the intelligentsia or the museums or any of these people like. You should feel like you have the right to appreciate what you want to appreciate.